Good afternoon, everybody. Is everybody ready to go? Hearing no objections. For the record, my name is Danny Smyth. I'm the Chief of Police here in Winnipeg. Today I want to provide you with an update into an investigation being conducted by the Major Crimes Unit with significant support by our uniformed members in various districts throughout the city. As some of you are aware, we've been reporting, and there's been some reporting on a rash of violent robberies and attacks that have occurred within the community over the last week or so. From my perspective, alarming to all of us is the fact that these attacks appeared to be random. The attackers have been described as youths, and the attacks have been violent, frankly, involving weapons like machetes. Today, we want the community to know that a number of youths have been identified, have been arrested, and charged with multiple criminal offenses pertaining to these robberies and attacks. All of them were initially charged. Most of them have been remanded into custody. And I just want to recap some of the events that I'm referring to. So on Sunday, March 10th, at about just before 5, there was an attack out in St. Vital at a bus stop on Riel and St. Mary's. There, a 19-year-old female victim was robbed and assaulted with a machete. So we have arrested a 13-year-old youth that we believe is responsible for that attack. I'm also referring to an attack that occurred on March 11th on Waterfront Drive near the Forks. There, a 25-year-old male was robbed and also a machete was used. In this particular case, even though we've identified someone that we think is responsible, the victim in this case doesn't want to proceed with any involvement with a criminal investigation. On March 12th, just after midnight, there was an attack at 260 Main near the Humphrey Inn on Main Street. There, a 25-year-old male was attacked. We've made several arrests on that, 2 youths and 1 adult. They have been charged, and actually in that case, those 2 were released, one on an appearance notice and one on an undertaking. Finally, there was an attack also on March 12th in the evening on Main and Rupert's Land. A 12-year-old boy on the transit bus was robbed at gunpoint for his cell phone. And again, we've made an arrest of a 13-year-old youth for that attack. Now, a couple of things I want to say about the attacks and the people that we've dealt with here. The youths involved in these crimes were of the understanding that they're known to each other, and many of them were together when these crimes were committed. One of the things that we know is all of them were in care, were in the system. None of them seem to come from stable homes. So I want to step back a little bit here and talk about some general themes here. So I'm not talking specifically about these 4 that I recapped, but just in general what we're seeing out there that our investigators have noted and that our general patrol officers see nearly every day. As I said, these youths appear to be in the system, appear to be in care. And what that means is that they're in group homes or foster homes. And those responsible for caring for the youths in these facilities, they don't have the resources or the tools to meet the needs of the youth in their care. This means that the kids are left to themselves to go anywhere and do anything that they see fit. Now, some of them are getting involved in crime, and some very serious crimes like the ones I recapped here today. I also want to point out that some are also left vulnerable to be exploited and often becoming victims of serious crimes themselves. No shortage of examples of that. And certainly circumstances of the young homicide victim on Graham Avenue this past December is an example of that, where someone that would have been in care or in a group home was left to her own devices. So on this case now, for the time being, these kids that we've charged will be detained and in custody, and they won't be able to commit any more violent offenses. But the reality is this will be temporary. They will be released conditionally at some point, and they will likely be returned to another group home or another foster home. And I just want to say that for the most part, we know the youths that we're dealing with, and this group, we have linked to several other offenses that are still ongoing in their investigation. When it's appropriate, you know, this is what I consider to be the tough on crime side of the message. Those that are responsible for these attacks and robberies, they will be held accountable. But the reality is these are kids. You know, it's one of those things where I want to talk about the other side of the coin here right now, and there's a work to do here. I want to talk about the tough on what's causing these crimes a little bit, and you've heard some of that spoken in the community. Clearly, there is work to do here. First and foremost, I want to acknowledge the extraordinary efforts of our missing persons unit and those working in uniform who are often tasked with looking for the youths that are reported missing from these group homes and foster homes. I want to acknowledge their frustration because often they're dealing with the same kids over and over again, but I also want to commend them for the tremendous work that they do to focus in this area every day to keep the youth safe that find themselves in these situations. I just want to remind you that we are in the process of establishing an integrated missing persons unit with the RCMP, Manitoba First Nations, and representatives and advocates for families and communities. I think it will provide a better service once it's up and running. But this is a really complicated issue, and it requires additional work. I think I'll end on this one just saying I look forward to the upcoming Public Safety Summit. I hope that these kinds of concerns and situations are discussed and considered at that summit. I do think the police have a role to play, but we're not the only ones that need to have a role. Now, I'm going to give you an opportunity to ask questions, knowing full well that we're talking about kids, so there's not a lot of detail I can provide. But just for a moment, I want to switch gears. There's been a lot of discussion in the community about police being involved with people in crisis. And I've spoken about this in the past. I've certainly disseminated a lot of information through the PIO and through our Substack platform at various times. I want to discuss a situation that occurred last night. Our members in uniform were patrolling in the Elmwood area when they encountered a male who was in crisis. He was acting erratically in the roadway and was observed trying to stop a lot of passing cars on the roadway. Our officers observed him run from the roadway to a nearby residence where he was seen banging on the door at this residence. Our members were concerned for his well-being, and they intervened. The male was observed to be in distress, and there were clearly signs of profuse sweating. Our officers had a brief discussion with the male, and he told them that he had ingested a mix of methamphetamine and cocaine, and he was clearly in distress. He was intoxicated, and our members took him into care. By taking him into care, that means taking him into detention under the authority of the Intoxicated Persons Detention Act. But they also had the foresight to call paramedics, which they did. Paramedics were called to assist them. The paramedics came to the scene, they examined the male, and they determined that they felt he needed further medical assessment at hospital. And they took him into care from our members. The male was cooperative. He calmed down and he agreed to go with the ambulance with the paramedics to hospital and entered into the ambulance voluntarily. Now, the paramedics asked the police to escort them. And as a professional courtesy, one of our members rode in the ambulance and the other member followed in his cruiser car. Now, en route to the hospital, the male began to act erratically again. And he opened up the ambulance door and he jumped. He jumped from a moving ambulance while it was in motion. The police officer driving the car behind the ambulance, he was able to see the male. The male got up and ran. He was able to catch up to the male. So all of this happened at about 4 in the morning. He caught up to the male in the vicinity of Maine, just north of Higgins. He was again taken into care, but he indicated to the police officer that caught him that he had injured his arm. So that was later verified. When the paramedics took him to the hospital, they verified that he had a fractured arm. So I mentioned this event for 2 reasons. It's a good example, I think, of how quickly a person can go from a stable disposition into a crisis situation and become a danger to themselves. Clearly, the paramedics didn't think that was going to occur. They had taken him into care into the ambulance. The other reason I mention this, even though this male was in the care of the paramedics, because our officer was present in the ambulance, it is the police officer whose conduct now will be investigated by the IIU. So under the prescribed regulations, the IIU is notified because the member or the male fractured his arm. So I'm going to leave it at that. And it's an illustration of how quickly things can change and how the system and the regulations prescribe what will be done so that to ensure some transparency. I want to acknowledge the efforts of the police officers that intervened into that situation last night. I think they did a good thing to assist that person who was clearly in distress, and I think something more untoward could have been the consequence. But the reality is, what seemed like a stable situation turned very quickly, and frankly, the IIU is going to conduct an investigation into the police officer. The paramedics will likely be witnesses to that of some sort. So, with that, I'm going to leave it there. I think it's a good example of some of the volatility that we encounter every day in the community. With that, if there are any questions on either of those, we'll see what we can do. Bearing in mind that A, it's an IIU investigation on the second one, and the first one involves a lot of use, so there's limited detail I can provide.
In regard to the youths, so were you saying that the suspect in these first 2 incidents, the St. Mary's Road, Maine and Rupert's Land, knows the 4 suspects in the 260 Maine robbery as well, or are you saying that group of 4 knew?
So there's clearly a fairly loose affiliation with a lot of the youths involved in these things. So in of the 4 that I described today, there was 1 youth that was involved in 2 of them. The Humphrey Inn one involved 4 youths. But we're of the belief that there is a loose affiliation of a bunch of youths that are involved in similar conduct. We're slowly trying to unravel the puzzle here a little bit, and I expect that more will come out of the investigation.
So at this point, not saying this is a gang of youths, but it's a group.
Not a gang in the way that we normally define gangs. It's not a street gang that's selling narcotics or anything. These are, so one of the things that's remarkable for me is that these youths are ranging in age from like 13 through 16 and 17 years old. So some very young people involved in this. They're affiliated to one another. The violence that we're seeing is remarkable. I mean, they're wielding machetes and using them almost what appears to be indiscriminately.
And you mentioned about most of these youths coming from foster homes and group homes. So what can be done as a solution to help them so that such youth crime doesn't escalate further?
So, I mean, that's $1 million question. I certainly hope that some of the service providers in that come to the table. Like I mentioned, there's an announcement of a summit. These are some of the very complicated things that need to be discussed and talked about. the police have a role with it, but it's not us to take the lead on that. Often we're prescribed to do things. So under the Child Act, we're prescribed to look for kids when they're reported missing, and our members do that every day. But we return them to care. So it's really the care that they're provided is really what needs to be addressed.
And the incident which happened at the Forks, is that also related to, are the same gang of youth involved with the incident on March 12th, where another
We think
group
they're
of
all
youth were
linked.
involved? So they're all linked to the one at Forks?
Yeah.
There's no mention of the Forks incident at the press release, right?
And I mentioned that
Yeah.
because the victim in that one doesn't want to be involved in any kind of criminal proceeding.
Oh, okay.
So there were no charges that were formally laid.
Okay. So are the ones in Forks related to the same ones to the one on March 12th, the same group of?
Yeah, so the four, and I don't know if they're listed in the
Yeah, that's-
release, they're all linked by the fact that we have a group of youths. Some of them act out alone, some of them act out together. We think there are more instances where this has occurred. We'll continue to investigate, but I think it was important to bring this forward now because these attacks have been quite violent. They appear random. We want to assure the community that we know who they are, and for the most part now we have identified, charged, and detained those involved.
From a policing perspective, obviously addressing issues within the foster system and everything else is very multifaceted. But from a policing perspective right now, what can the police service do to address youth?
So, of course, holding people to account when they commit criminal, that's the criminal side of the house. But the tough on the causes of crime, as the way it's been put, we have a role in that as well. Often it is about connecting people with the services that they need. So often when we're looking for missing children, they're turned over to the care providers that we hope will connect them with the services they need. In general, that's what we do on the preventative side. In this case with the assaults, but also even in people in crisis. We're not intending to use the justice system to deal with that. It's to get them into care and get them the support that they need so that they can either get well or remain in the community.
I think I was getting hung up on the mention of the Forks incident, but I just so I'm clear here. The St. Mary's Road and Main Street Rivers Land have.
So let me try to frame it a different way. Let me try to frame it a different way. So the bus stop robbery that occurred on Riel and St. Mary's and the robbery that occurred on the bus at Main and Rupertsland, same youth,
Yeah.
same youth
Yeah.
charged.
Of course,
To the
no,
And he acted alone.
Okay.
But is he connected to the?
Yes.
group in that second?
Yes, he is. I wouldn't mention that he was connected if he wasn't. So,
I just wasn't quite sure.
so the other ones that I talked about, those were done by sort of groups. Waterfront is not proceeding because the victim doesn't want to proceed, but 2 people were charged in the attack on Main Street near the Humphrey Inn.
So the 13-year-old, he's got 3 counts of failed to comply with the sentence order. Clearly is prior involvement in the justice system at age 13. What does that say to you about this issue?
It suggests to me that his needs are not being met, and I think that's part of what our message is as much as we can do on the criminal side, some attention needs to be addressed to the needs of these kids that are in the system.
And is there any sort of like a mental health issue with especially with a 13-year-old?
Couldn't really comment on that. That's kind of outside our area of expertise. They've been charged criminally. We will rely on those that are dealing with them now to get them either the care that they need or the help that they may need.
And the fact that he had a machete, how easy is it to get a machete to a 14-year-old?
Pretty easy. You can get anything off the internet, just about.
Okay.
They're not necessarily buying it from the store. They could probably, but it's not that hard to get knives and machetes and things of that nature.
Do you think some of those kids were under the influence when?
Don't know, I have no indication that they were.
Do you think also there is an influence of maybe elders? Because my question right now is, would you have the money to buy a machete online but not to get a phone? Like a secondhand?
So I'm not going to bring elders into this whatsoever. I have nothing to indicate that they're being influenced by
Yeah.
any adults or elders, but I do know we're seeing over and over again that often kids who are finding themselves in the circumstances of group homes and foster homes, their needs aren't being met and they're taken off.
So there's 4 suspects here. Yes, between all the incidents on the paper here. There's 4 suspects.
There's actually 3, right? So
Yeah.
the 13-year-old youth was charged in 2 of those events and he acted alone.
Okay.
And then the one on Main Street near the Humphrey Inn, 2 additional youths were charged with that.
Okay, sorry, I thought everybody was a ward of some, but I'm seeing a 20-year-old.
Right. So fair enough. And the 20-year-old was charged in that. I guess what I'm trying to emphasize here is we are aware of multiple youths that are involved in this kind of activity, committing serious crimes with serious weapons, and they're all kind of affiliated to one another.
I mean, where does it go from here in terms of investigating this group?
So those that, of course, that we can establish charges, they'll be held accountable, and dealt with under the Young Offenders Act, and but the reality is they are kids, right? So they will be released from custody. They will be likely, housed again in another group home or another foster home. So this is an issue for us that we all have to kind of address here. There's a role for police in some of this, but I guess there's also, a necessity to address some of the root causes that have been described here. And that's kind of the clarion song here for me.
And so of course, this 19-year-old woman, she was quite seriously injured.
She was.
Were the other victims of robbery injured quite badly at all? It doesn't appear like it.
No, I don't think that there were any significant injuries, although being robbed at gunpoint is a little traumatic, I would suggest. So these are serious things and nothing that you would want any of your loved ones to be involved in.
Do you think there should be a few weeks ago, security, wellness or security officers were released in bus stations and around? Do you think there should be also some kind of mediation team that should be on a non-violent, knowing that kids are out in the middle of the night?
Can you just kind of frame that again for me? I'll
Yes.
respond.
Non-armed police and not police officers, but officers that are trained with harm and violence, similar to those that have been trained in buses that would be maybe in this downtown area at night?
So I'll say a couple of things to that. First of all, when it comes to training, our officers have the most training, short of clinicians themselves, in the areas that you're talking about. So they're well equipped to deal with these things. Now, there are units and people out there that are trying to help mitigate some of this. We have the downtown community safety folks. They get involved in people that are not in crisis, but try to connect them with services that they need. So I would argue that's exactly what you're describing, and they're doing that role. I would not expect them to get involved in anything that was dangerous or would cause them harm. The other group, of course, is there's been a lot of press about the transit safety community officers. They're starting to have a presence on the buses, and they're trained to do the very things that you're talking about too. And I also recall earlier this week they got assaulted trying to do their job, and when it went sideways on them. So again, it just illustrates to me and hopefully to you that these situations can turn really quickly, and people with the best of training and intentions can still be harmed.
In regard to the St. Mary's Road race, so was the victim struck with this? She was struck with a machete?
Yeah, so she was robbed and assaulted with the machete while she was waiting for a bus.
And then the civilian bystander came in to help. Is there anything where you can say, well, what happened there? It just happened to be walking by, or?
I don't have that level of detail in my briefing, but if you're looking for more, we'll connect you.
I do wonder, that I'm taking a bit of a different path, but I mean, there was that report released yesterday by the Coalition of Social Agencies. I mean, what are your thoughts on that agency's report?
So the reason I bring up groups like the Downtown Community Safety, they're doing the things that group is talking about already. It's just a different variation of it in our city. One of the things that's been cherry picked a little bit by that group that was promoting the Toronto model and the Coots, they are not dispatched to dangerous situations. They are not dispatched to situations where there are weapons. They are sent to non-emergency situations where they feel that their services can be used to further connect these people with the help that they need. So this notion that you're going to send a team to a potentially violent situation unarmed or just with their wits and their training, I think is a little misplaced.
And I think it might be difficult to determine what makes a non-emergency situation, non-crisis situation, but I mean, would the service be open to having a crisis team that is responding to non-violent situations without police being involved?
So again, the reason I bring up because that's what they're doing already, and they're a pretty good partner for us in the community. Our model, the ARC model, it's intended to expand that potentially could include clinicians going into the field on their own, but also have to point out that the mobile crisis unit, the people that we they're already in the community doing the very things you're describing. So this notion that doesn't occur in our community is misleading by the way it's being reported, because there are lots of groups that are attempting to deal with people before they get into crisis, and they're doing that job. So it's not something that we're lacking. Could we use more of it? Probably. But also point out, we're not stocked full of clinicians waiting for jobs right now. There's a major shortage going on, and it just speaks to the strain on our entire healthcare system.
Question I was just emailed. The youth that were from group homes, are they all from the same group home?
No,
How many group?
I'm not going to get into. You're kind of getting into youth now. You're getting into care. That's not something that we would normally. I got to keep real high level on that, so I'm not getting into
I
specifics
get
of that.
that, but I mean, the question that I was just saying,
Yeah.
were they all from the same group?
No, they're not.
Thank you.
A couple more questions? Any?
I mean, to Smyth, and I know it's going to sound a silly question, but I mean, why is this alarming to you? Why is this alarming to the service to see this spat of violence with such young people?
Well, I have young kids in my own household. We want our kids and our loved ones, we want our community to be able to go about their business without having to look over their shoulder. I have to remind everyone, or I don't, if you have kids, spring break's coming up. There's going to be lots of people going to movies, going to malls, doing things that young people do. And I think it's really important that we address this and we build some awareness around this so people can make informed decisions.
Anything more? Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Eric.